march to his lowly station till he checks out in Revelations. Why you keep up your life makes no sense to me. There may be a throne in heaven and a picked hell for the gun.
Welcome to Ounce of Prevention. I'm Vickie Morgan, and today my guest is none other than Paul David Power. Paul, thank you so much for being on Ounce of Prevention.
Oh, thanks for having me.
So, Paul, as you know, the reason I wanted you to come on Ounce of Prevention is because the focus of this show is people who have inspiring lived experiences, and yours is nothing short of inspiring.
Oh, thank you.
And I really appreciate you being so willing and open to this. So thank you ahead of time. Tell me about your mental health journey.
Well, it's a long one.
I'll get comfortable.
And again, thank you for having me on the show. And I'm a big advocate in breaking stigmas and talking about it. So happy to do it. I guess my mental health journey goes all the way back to the Stone Age when I was younger, the late 90s. And I always felt I guess a big emotional roller coaster in the way of feeling up and feeling down. Mm-hmm. And of course, growing up in the 80s and 90s, we certainly didn't diagnose or have awareness of mental health as we do now.
Right.
And just assumed it was being moody or emotional. Mm-hmm. So I'm talking about either being way up in emotions or way down. Mm-hmm. And, but I coped, and the late 90s, I was dealing with a number of things. Yeah. And I'm also gay. Mm-hmm. And I hadn't come out of the closet to my family.
Wow.
And I had my first fling and heartbreak, and of course you can't talk about that with anyone if you're in the closet.
Wow.
And so my heart was broken, and I just started a new job in government and felt a lot of pressure. Mm-hmm. And wasn't really fitting in at the time very well there. And all those things together sort of escalated, and all of a sudden I found myself unable to cope. Or I remember being in my parents' backyard having a coffee by myself and saying to myself, I think I'm in trouble, meaning I don't feel I can cope with all the things that are going on. And I took it upon myself to go to a mental health practitioner, a psychiatrist, and basically told him everything that was going on in my life that I just told you. And we decided on medication. Mm-hmm. So along with my mood swings or severe depression, I also realized I had remarkable anxiety. And so I worked with the psychiatrist, and we did an approach of, it's the whole physical side of mental health. Yeah. and the wiring up there, and what you need assistance with in the way of medication. Yeah. And then the two-pronged approach, I also saw a psychologist, which helped me just talk about your feelings and do what we call cognitive therapy, which is learning to not always go to negative thoughts or make negative assumptions. And I found at that time, and again, this was the late 90s, really worked for me. Mm-hmm. And found a good level of medication and all that, and was very easy to cope for several years with that approach. With that
plan.
Yeah. Of course, you go through all the, I guess the things I've learned over the years is mental health is, there's no cure. Mm-hmm. It's a coping thing.
Right.
And, you sometimes fall off the wagon. And again, even the early 2000s, you always feel like, I'm doing good, but I would be better if I wasn't on medication. And so at least I did. I tried a couple of times. I don't think I need this anymore. Mm-hmm. And you don't make the connection of you're feeling better because you are on this program, or you're taking the advice of your doctor. And so I had a few falling off the wagon, I guess, in the way of treatment. Yeah. But for the most part, okay. And in 2013, I lost my partner of 9 years. He suddenly passed away. And again, I guess it was meeting this monumental life challenge
Yeah.
and sense of loss. And I really believe that if you do have any kind of mental health issues, there's certain wiring up there that triggers it. All the research I've done and from science and all that.
Yeah.
And, I found myself desperate again. Almost suicidal thoughts, and went back into treatment. The best story I have coming out of that is, I guess, how far we've come in mental health. Mm-hmm. I went to the emergency room. I was living in Moncton, New Brunswick at the time, and I went to the emergency room with a mental health crisis. And at the time, the emergency room actually had a mental health nurse for triage and to receive you. And they treated it as if I'd come in with a broken arm or anything. And I was in a desperate state. I hadn't slept for like 5 or 6 days. And of course, it was grief, but it was much more than grief. It was just feeling completely desperate. But I love that they had a mental health nurse there.
Yeah.
And she sat down with me for 2 hours, and I talked about everything. Like, once again, what I was feeling. And again, we looked at an approach of medication, along with a psychologist and the whole cognitive therapy. And sometimes you just need a validation of what you're feeling is okay. And so that visit to the emergency room did that. And I still remember once the mental health nurse was finished with me, the doctor came in who would prescribe and take recommendations from the mental health nurse. And she commended me for coming to the emergency room with a mental health crisis. And she said so many people would not do that.
Right.
It would still be the approach of, just get over it, or there's something wrong with me, and people are going to think, I'm a drama queen or something, going to the emergency room with a mental health issue.
Right. There's really sick people in there. You'll be taking time away from the people who have health problems.
Absolutely. And I really liked how that doctor commended me for coming in and recognizing that.
Because it was a health problem.
Absolutely.
It was a problem and crisis.
And it makes you feel like you did the right thing.
Right.
So that was in 2013, and again, it's been years of finding the right level of medication and the right types of therapy when needed, and then living with it. And like I said earlier, it isn't a cure. It's coping approach, I guess. And certainly being I'm involved in the theater world and out there a lot, and it's a lot of a struggle sometimes choosing that career, as well as always walking around with anxiety and depression and for me, mental health. When you do have issues, it's a lot of tiredness and all that, and you cope with that. It's a long-term way of life, even though the medication and approaches to therapy help. It peaks and goes.
It seems like any other part of your body, like your heart, for example. Your heart might have, if your diet's not great and you have a lot of arteries clogged and things like that, you fix it, but then your heart could also get tired, or it could get some sort of valve problems, or it's an ongoing thing. So there's no real, I'm set now, I did some therapy, I got some coping mechanisms, I should be good. Because as we know, life keeps happening, and there's no limit to how much stuff life will throw at you. You still get bad stuff no matter how hard you're trying and how much you're putting in place. So
absolutely.
So what jumped out about your visit to the hospital in Moncton, were you afraid that they were going to keep you? Take you in and say, okay, we're going to put you up on the 3rd floor, we're not going to let you out, we're going to keep you for this length? Like, were you worried about, or was it just so desperate that you didn't care what the fix was?
It wasn't either of those. It was, I almost felt myself that I should be. That I felt like, so at the end of my rope, that maybe I did need to be admitted to some kind of support like that.
Yeah.
They didn't recommend that. Certainly, they put me in touch as well with a new family doctor, like across Canada, or it's so hard to even get a family doctor
Yep.
with our shortage of doctors or
Yep.
family practitioners.
It's such a great country, and the doctors don't want to come here.
Absolutely.
It's so weird, right?
Yeah. So, it was what also helped going into that emergency setting was it helped me jump a queue or jump a line of finding a doctor
Yeah.
that I could. And I
Yeah.
had weekly visits with this doctor
Right.
For a long time,
Yeah.
based on the status of my mental health at the time,
Yeah.
and it was a real great example of holistic care, if that makes sense, where we have like the medical professionals. I had a psychologist
Yeah.
for more of the talking
Right.
and finding the way yourself emotionally, and then always checking in to
Right.
see how that's all working. And my doctor used to call it a cocktail of the different medications
Absolutely.
because I had sleeping problems, still do, for quite a while.
Yeah.
And, I recommend that type of approach, and not thinking that you take a pill that's going to cure everything.
No,
But
because
no,
the
I
problems
was-
are still there.
Absolutely.
It'll keep your head above water for a little while, but you still need to.
Yeah.
The work needs to be done.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
But the most important thing was speaking up and having the insight to go to emergency, and, especially in today's climate, and there's so much of a long wait list even to get see a psychiatrist, or
Yeah.
I felt I had been heard and heard seriously.
Yeah.
And I did, the mental health nurse was with me for a few hours, and then of course the doctor coming in and saying that she commends me for coming in. So I felt support there.
Yeah.
I also walked away with like I said, I hadn't been sleeping for about 5 or 6 days.
Right.
So I walked
Which makes
away
everything.
with medication to help me sleep.
Yeah.
Which was my main driving thing as well.
Yeah.
And I didn't know how to get out of that.
Right.
And, as well as follow-up appointments. So for me, that was enough to know that I was heard.
Yeah.
And I had follow-up appointments
Yeah.
and follow-ups, formal support
Yeah.
coming.
Sounds like it recharged your batteries a little bit.
I think it gave me something to grasp onto,
Yeah.
which I didn't, because there was family around and friends and that, and they can only do so much in the way of comfort or give advice or
Absolutely.
So
And I've found too with friends and family and stuff, they want you to feel better in the moment. They just want it to stop hurting right this second. They're going to tell you what you need to hear for the moment. But the other approaches, psychiatrists and psychologists will give you more coping mechanisms so you can survive for long term, not just in the moment.
Right.
And that seems to be the professional. I mean, there's definitely a need for professional services and medicine, and those are great things. And recognizing that you need those things it takes a lot of courage, really, to admit, just to be open to it. And when you get to that desperate state, there's another choice you could have made, obviously, and you wouldn't be here. So that's kind of that's a terrifying thing, but good on you that you saw value in yourself. Because
Right.
we need you here for sure.
Oh,
Which leads me to
I'm
my,
glad to be here,
and we're very happy to have you, Paul. The work that you're doing here in St. John's, in the province, really in the country, is really inspiring. I want to say, I'm not saying despite these issues that you've had, alongside of these issues, you've also managed to build some things that are helping other people. So can you tell me about Power Productions?
Well, Power Productions is a company that I started, I guess, informally a few years ago. So I live with a disability. Beyond the mental health, I have all of it covered. But besides the mental health issues, I live with a disability that requires the use of leg braces and crutches. When I was born, my legs just didn't develop correctly, so I need extra support physically. And I got involved in theater and the arts, and I've been involved for many years. And I noticed that at least in our community, I seem to be one of very few diverse actors and creators who live with or identify with having some kind of physical disability. And I always wondered why, or where are my peers? And a few years ago, I got invited to some major conferences and development opportunities nationally. And there is certain movements going on the national scale of what we call disabled, deaf, and mad arts theater.
What does MAD stand for?
Pardon me?
What does MAD stand for?
I'm not sure. MAD, I think they've just reclaimed the word for mental health.
Okay.
Yeah.
So deaf, disabled, and mad.
Yeah.
Okay.
And
I'd say mad is a pretty good way to describe some.
absolutely. Yeah.
Most of us are pretty mad about what's going on.
I thought that was a Newfoundland term, though, right? You're mad.
Yeah, you're mad by it. Yeah. Well, we are. Let's claim it.
Absolutely.
Sorry. Okay. So you went to this conference and they told you.
Well, I met peers. I
Yep.
finally met peers who had physical disabilities who were
Yep.
involved in theater.
Yeah.
And came back to Newfoundland after these great experiences and wanted to create that kind of peer group that I found on a national scale here in Newfoundland. So I started Power Productions, which is devoted to fostering and developing theater arts opportunities for persons with disabilities. And our first main thing out of the gate was a play that I wrote called Crippled, which got a lot of attention, which thankfully also got a lot of attention for Power Productions. And with that, I started workshops and reaching out to the disabled community and beyond, looking to build this this group of artists who, for many reasons, have felt not included in the arts community.
Just not heard.
No,
Yeah.
absolutely. It's not heard here. And
Not only are they not heard, but then you don't even get a chance to see how creative and brilliant so many people are, but there's barriers.
there's major barriers, especially in St. John's. Physical barriers. Most of the theater companies have little money, so there's very little resources for accessible venues, even accessible venues to hold auditions.
Right.
For sign language interpreters, for audio describers, all the supports someone with some kind of disability would need to participate.
Right.
And I'm trying to drive that forward. And I've learned also breaking new ground and trying to create a community that right now does not exist, meaning a disability arts community here in Newfoundland.
They're there. There's just not a community.
They're
yet.
there, but it's also, you have to drag them out.
So, Paul, is part of your mandate for Power Productions to make theater and creative endeavors accessible to actors, or do you also make the performances and events accessible? Is that your goal?
It's the goal for both sectors, artists, actors, or if they want to be technicians or whatever, as well as audience members.
Yeah.
There's sectors that we just haven't tapped into,
Absolutely.
which makes sense in not only just to be a more inclusive society, but from an economical standpoint, I mean, we're always looking for those audience members. Right. And there's sectors that, you can bring in, you can draw
All
in.
populations of people that don't get to experience any of these things.
Absolutely. So we did Crippled. My play premiered at the LSPO Hall in 2018, and I believe it was the first time ever that a theater show offered audio description.
Wow.
For people who are blind.
Right.
And, the first time in Newfoundland, and I learned about that at these national conferences about disability I was talking about, and brought them in and to do the audio description, and we were applauded by the CNIB and other advocates, and I think it was the first time that there was that resource for people who are blind or have any kind of sight impairment. And
so how does that work? Is there something that they wear? Is the audio fed
just like
directly?
you put on a headset when you enter the theater, and there's a narrator in the back who's telling you what's going on stage.
So it has no impact on, you can't hear it, the other people in the audience can't hear that the narration is
so it's
happening.
headsets.
It's right in directly into the people who
And there's a real art form to this audio description,
Absolutely.
right? So it's providing the information that's needed. So you don't have a narrator going through the whole, you get to listen to the dialogue.
They'll just tell you what's going on stage.
Yeah, that's
Okay.
great. And we also brought in sign language. And
So you have interpreters there for
we had
different kind of hearing.
ASL interpreters for 2 shows. I wanted everything for all the shows,
Yep.
but financially, it's a struggle.
Yes, it is expensive to have interpreters for a show. Absolutely. So how do you find funding for things like, because I mean, the goal would be to have every show accessible. How do you find funding for things like that?
The Canada Council for the Arts has been really great in, I guess, mainstreaming their focus on disability, deaf and mad arts.
Yeah.
And that includes when you apply for funding to do a show or a tour, they really look positively on a budget line included for those type of supports, which is great.
Awesome.
I haven't been turned down yet for financial support from
Yep.
Canada Council to do that.
Yep.
Right now, we have also, we're calling on our provincial politicians and the Newfoundland and Labrador Arts Council
Yep.
To make a commitment to more funding for the arts
Yep.
in general. We haven't had increased funding for I think it's 4 or 5 years now,
Been a long time.
and we're pretty low when it comes to looking at the national scale.
And what the arts brings into this province
Absolutely.
is astronomical.
Yeah,
when you
and
look
it's a
at
business.
It. Yeah.
And there's such a return on investment that you don't see in any other kind of business sector.
That's true.
And it is a business.
Yeah.
And part of why there's a lot of artists now advocating for that. And
Yep.
part of why I am on that bandwagon is, yes, we need more support of our artists, but we
Right.
also need funding to make our not just theater, but our entire arts world more accessible.
Yep.
I'd love to see Newfoundland. Well, no, I wouldn't love to. I think Newfoundland Labrador Arts and our government need to create that budget line for accessible supports. You don't know what the challenges are unless you've had that lived experience of having a physical disability or mental health issues. And I would bet, for the most part, our funding decision makers, federally, provincially, municipalities, don't see the value totally in accessibility. And it means more than a ramp. And if you don't see that value, you're not going to support funding for that.
Tell me about the benefits of having creative outlet as somebody who has been living with mental health issues for most of your life. Tell me about the benefits, besides from medication and aside from doctors and all those other things. Tell me about the outlet that is creative work.
For me, I consider myself an artist, and it really is. If you are an artist, you always feel you have this. You need to express yourself somehow, and for me, it's writing, and to some degree, acting.
Mm-hmm.
It's a way to express yourself creatively and productively.
Right.
I keep going back to my play Crippled, but that really helped me as well with the grief process of losing my partner.
Yeah.
And it was about Jonathan passed away in 2013, and I think it was 2 years before I actually wanted to write a play about it.
Yeah.
But leading up to that, I did, I wrote poetry. I edited, I did like videos and all this creation stuff, not necessarily for anyone to see but myself, but it helped express what I was feeling at the time.
I'm glad you're doing this work. It obviously needs to be done, and I'm glad that it's been helpful for you. Tell me about Crippled.
Crippled is a story about a man who lost his partner. And is really questioning whether he wants to go on with life. It's also about the character lives with a physical disability. His partner gave him, confidence and a unique perspective on his sexuality, his attractiveness, his being wanted. So that's part of the grief process for this character. And it all reflects back on my own lived experience, and so it's autobiographical, but it delves into a lot of interesting issues, including the universal themes of grief. We've all lost someone or something and can relate to grief. It also puts living with a physical disability in the spotlight, which is pretty culturally unique for anyone who has that lived experience.
Yeah.
And it gives insight on what it's like to grow up with a disability.
Yeah.
And most of all, the production model for Crippled is inclusive theater. So when we can't afford it, and it is part of the production model to offer accessibility supports, including sign language and audio description.
Yeah. So how do you keep your wits about you? How do you keep on track with the vision of Power Productions and not get really discouraged when you get turned down? The work's done, the play is written, it's been mounted, it's been received wonderful praise. You've got a company in the United States that wants to take you down there. How do you cope with that?
In regards to mental health, it's knowing that you've been heard, knowing that you've been diagnosed, and being able to identify those traits within your actions or your thought process definitely helps. Sure, I get down, and some days it's, you know what, I'm going to chuck all this and I'm going to go work at McDonald's and be a lot easier. But I find I can recognize the thoughts I'm having. It doesn't mean that I completely come out of it, you know, when you're feeling down or whatever.
In the moment,
I recognize it's part of living with diagnosed mental health issues, which keeps it in perspective. And I think it's also age. I think as we get older, things that would really upset us don't anymore, because we've had experience and letdowns before, and you sort of have to. You learn at a certain age that, this is monumental today. This won't matter a thing in a year. Yeah. Keeping that in perspective. But the big thing is being able to talk about your mental health issues and recognize that if you're feeling beyond down, there's something else going on there beyond just life.
Yeah, and some things, it seems to me that if you are angry or down, some things you need to go through, and it seems like you might come out the other side even more determined.
Absolutely.
You're definitely a fighter, no question.
Lucifer, the light of heaven, that sinner never was forgiven, banished to his lowly station, till he checks out in Revelations. Why?